The Second World War fundamentally reshaped the nature of ground combat. The unstoppable advance of the German Blitzkrieg in 1940 demonstrated the devastating power of armored formations. For the British Army, the urgent need for an effective infantry anti-tank weapon became immediately apparent. Soldiers required something lightweight, portable, and powerful enough to defeat the latest German panzers. Before the PIAT, infantrymen relied on cumbersome anti-tank rifles or highly dangerous magnetic mines. The development process was fraught with challenges, primarily centered around its unique spigot mortar design. Unlike rocket-propelled grenades, the PIAT launched its projectile using a massive spring and a charge in the tail of the bomb. This mechanism eliminated the backblast associated with rocket launchers, a critical safety advantage in enclosed spaces. However, the enormous spring required an immense effort to compress, often demanding two strong men to cock the weapon. This initial difficulty contributed significantly to the early derision the weapon often faced from both British and Allied troops. The sheer physical exertion of readying the PIAT for action became a common complaint among infantrymen. Despite its awkwardness, the resulting projectile delivered a powerful shaped charge warhead against enemy armor. The successful penetration of a tank's armor was not guaranteed, but the destructive potential was certainly there. The PIAT was officially designated the Projector, Infantry, Anti-Tank. It was a true testament to British wartime improvisation and necessity over elegance. Its entry into frontline service marked a significant shift in the infantry's ability to defend against armored threats. The weapon's heavy weight and short effective range also presented considerable tactical difficulties for its users. Nevertheless, it was the best, and often the only, solution available to the average British Tommy facing a tank. This ungainly apparatus would soon be responsible for changing the landscape of urban warfare forever. The early struggles and initial mocking would fade in the face of its deadly effectiveness in the later campaigns. The core principle behind the PIAT's success lay in its use of the high-explosive anti-tank, or HEAT, warhead. This technology utilized a shaped charge to focus the explosive energy into a high-velocity jet of metal. The resulting jet was capable of piercing even the thickest armor plate of a tank. German counterparts like the Panzerfaust and Panzerschreck were more refined rocket-propelled weapons. These German designs appeared more technologically advanced than the PIAT's massive spring-loaded tube. The simplicity of the PIAT's mechanism, however, provided certain operational advantages in the field. Since there was no rocket motor, the weapon did not produce the highly visible cloud of smoke and flame. This lack of signature flash made the PIAT teams much harder to spot immediately after firing. The British weapon could therefore be employed with greater concealment than its German rivals. Its maximum effective range was theoretically around 100 yards, a distance that demanded extreme courage from the operator. The PIAT gunner had to allow the enemy tank to approach almost on top of his position. Such close-quarters engagement significantly amplified the terror and risk for the infantryman. The initial velocity of the bomb was relatively low, requiring the gunner to lead a moving target significantly. Firing the weapon was also a profoundly loud and jarring experience for the operator. The recoil was manageable only because the spring had absorbed most of the explosive's force. German tank crews initially viewed the PIAT with a profound sense of technological superiority and disdain. They saw it as a clumsy, obsolete design compared to their own streamlined anti-tank rockets. This initial underestimation by the elite SS and Wehrmacht tank crews proved to be a fatal misjudgment. The raw power of the heat warhead, once it successfully connected, spoke a universal language of destruction. The PIAT represented a democratic weapon, putting anti-tank power directly into the hands of the lowest-ranking infantry soldier. The elite armored divisions of the Waffen-SS represented the pinnacle of German tank development and doctrine. These units were equipped with the formidable Tiger and Panther tanks, machines of genuine battlefield terror. Early encounters with the PIAT, particularly during the fighting in Tunisia and Sicily, left a mixed impression. The weapon's awkwardness and the visible struggle to load it led to an initial sense of German mockery. Intelligence reports dismissed the PIAT as an inferior, overly complicated weapon compared to the simplicity of the Panzerfaust. SS propaganda often highlighted the supposed technological disparity between Allied and German gear. Tank crews felt nearly invincible inside the thick sloped armor of their new Panther and Tiger tanks. They considered a close-range PIAT attack a desperate, last-ditch effort by a doomed enemy infantryman. This arrogant confidence, however, was shattered as the war moved into the densely populated towns of Normandy. The nature of the fighting rapidly devolved from open field maneuvers to brutal urban clearance operations. This shift in environment played directly into the strengths of the PIAT and its shaped charge projectile. Suddenly, the PIAT was not being fired from open ground, but from concealed positions within buildings. The weapon's zero backblast feature meant it could be fired from a small room without injuring the operator. This new, terrifying reality meant that every window, every cellar, and every doorway was a potential ambush point. German tank commanders could no longer rely on spotting the telltale smoke signature of a rocket. The SS crews began to experience catastrophic, sudden attacks without warning, turning street fighting into a nightmare. Their disdain quickly transformed into a genuine, creeping dread of invisible PIAT teams. The high-caliber main gun of the tank was often ineffective against a determined infantry team at point-blank range. The vulnerability of the tank side and rear armor was ruthlessly exposed in these tight urban environments. The weapon that they once laughed at became the principal danger to their supposedly invulnerable war machines. The Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1944 provided the perfect proving ground for the PIAT's true capabilities. The German defenders were dug into the bocage countryside, characterized by dense hedgerows and sunken lanes. These natural obstacles negated the long-range advantage of the larger German tank guns. Every small town and village became a fortress, demanding brutal house-to-house combat from the Allied infantry. This close, restricted fighting terrain immediately favored the short-range, ambush-oriented PIAT. British infantry units, trained extensively in clearing operations, integrated the weapon into their tactical doctrine. PIAT teams learned to lie in wait, allowing the heavy German armor to rumble past their initial cover. They would then emerge to deliver a crippling shot to the less protected side or rear of the tank. The success rate was still dependent on the skill and sheer nerve of the individual gunner. A miss meant almost certain death for the two-man PIAT crew, which made every shot count immensely. One of the most famous actions involving the PIAT occurred during the intense fighting for the town of Tilly-sur-Seulles. British infantry used the weapon to devastating effect against the formidable Panther tanks of the SS divisions. The thick, sloped frontal armor of the Panther was nearly impervious to the PIAT's blast. However, the side armor was vulnerable, and this was the lesson quickly learned by the aggressive British teams. The psychological pressure on the SS crews began to mount with every successful ambush. They could see no clear pattern to the attacks, only the sudden, blinding flash of a shaped charge impact. The battle for Caen and other urban centers turned into a meat grinder for the German armored units. The PIAT, once a joke, was systematically whittling down the numerical advantage of the SS Panzer forces. It was in the dusty, broken streets of these Normandy towns that the weapon earned its terrifying reputation. The early performance justified the faith of its designers and validated the aggressive tactics of the British infantry. The decisive shift in the PIAT's reputation stemmed directly from its tactical employment in enclosed spaces. The British quickly realized the inherent advantage of the zero backblast system. Standard anti-tank rockets, like the American bazooka or the German Panzerschreck, were deadly to fire indoors. The violent plume of fire and hot gas from the rocket's motor would severely injure or kill the operator in a confined space. The PIAT, using a silent spring to initiate the launch, bypassed this critical constraint entirely. This freedom allowed the infantry to establish firing positions deep inside buildings and cellars. A single PIAT gunner could transform a civilian dwelling into a fortified anti-tank bunker. The most terrifying ambush sites were positioned on the upper floors of buildings overlooking a street. From a broken window, the PIAT could target the thin deck armor on top of a German tank. This top armor was deliberately thin to save weight, assuming artillery was the main threat from above. A hit to the turret roof or engine deck often led to an immediate, catastrophic internal fire. German tank crews were trained to scan the ground level for threats but rarely looked straight up. The concept of an anti-tank ambush being sprung from a second-story window was profoundly shocking. The inability to safely fire a counterblast from the tank's main gun into a building also favored the PIAT team. The sheer volume of fire required to suppress every building on a street was simply unsustainable for the Germans. This innovative use of terrain gave the lightly armed infantry the upper hand in a direct fight with a tank. It forced German armor to move cautiously, or risk being caught by an invisible projectile. The close proximity also increased the kinetic energy and destructive power of the shaped charge upon impact. The ambush tactics turned the PIAT from a clumsy weapon into a precision instrument of destruction. The spigot mortar principle is an old concept in ordnance, but its application in the PIAT was highly innovative. Instead of an external barrel, the PIAT used a fixed internal spigot that fit into the tail of the projectile. The powerful mainspring drove the spigot into the projectile, detonating the propellant charge inside the tail. This propulsion method was unconventional, but it provided the necessary force to project the bomb a short distance. Crucially, the PIAT projectile utilized a hollow tail for the propellant charge, which was then sealed. When fired, the gas expansion occurred entirely within the projectile's tail and the PIAT's tube. This contained blast prevented the damaging backblast that plagued other anti-tank weapons. The resulting sound was more of a dull, muffled thud than the roar of a rocket launcher. The lack of a bright, trailing rocket flame was the single greatest tactical advantage of the design. It allowed the firing team to remain hidden and often fire multiple shots before their location was determined. The PIAT's bomb was a heavy, fin-stabilized projectile containing the sophisticated heat warhead. This bomb was designed to detonate on contact, focusing the energy into a narrow, high-velocity jet. The energy concentration meant that the projectile did not need to rely on sheer mass or kinetic force to penetrate. Even older armor could be defeated easily, and the modern, thick German armor was vulnerable on its flanks. The short range and awkwardness were the necessary trade-offs for the weapon's unique tactical versatility. The design was inherently simple, making it relatively inexpensive and quick to mass-produce. Thousands of PIATs were distributed to frontline infantry units, saturating the battlefield with anti-tank capability. The British engineers achieved a clever solution to the problem of confined space operation. This unique firing system directly contributed to the weapon's notoriety among the enemy tank crews. The inherent safety of firing from within a room saved countless British infantry lives over the course of the war. The effectiveness of the PIAT extended far beyond its mere armor-piercing capabilities. Its true power lay in the intense psychological stress it inflicted upon the German tank crews. In open country, a tank crew felt relatively safe, with a clear field of fire and superior optics. They could spot and engage enemy infantry from a distance, minimizing the threat of close-range weapons. Urban warfare, however, dissolved this sense of security instantly and completely. The PIAT's capacity to appear from any unseen window or doorway created an environment of continuous paranoia. A tank crew's worst fear is not the tank cannon they can see, but the infantryman they cannot. The sudden, silent arrival of the PIAT's projectile caused a devastating loss of morale. Crews learned that entering a built-up area was akin to rolling into a death trap. The concentration required to scan 360 degrees for invisible enemies was mentally exhausting. Tank commanders, traditionally exposed in their cupolas for better visibility, became extremely hesitant to unbutton. Driving with hatches closed significantly reduced situational awareness, leading to more ambushes. The crews began to apply crude, field-expedient defenses to their tanks, such as hanging track segments. These attempts to create standoff armor showed a clear admission of fear regarding the PIAT threat. The presence of the PIAT forced German armored doctrine to slow down and adopt more cautious tactics. Infantry support became absolutely critical for German tanks operating in towns and cities. Without dismounted infantry clearing every building, a tank was essentially blind and vulnerable. The simple knowledge that a PIAT could be hiding behind any stack of rubble was enough to induce terror. This psychological pressure translated directly into reduced combat effectiveness and increased caution. The British infantry had successfully turned the urban environment itself into a potent anti-tank weapon. The experience of an SS tank crewman facing the PIAT was a terrifying and claustrophobic ordeal. Inside the cramped confines of a Panther or a Tiger, the outside world is viewed through narrow vision ports. The deafening roar of the engine and the clanking of the tracks isolate the crew from external sounds. A PIAT attack often came with no audible warning, shattering the relative security of the metal shell. The first sign of an attack was typically a violent, metallic clang followed by a bright internal flash. If the shaped charge successfully penetrated, the jet of molten metal sprayed deadly fragments inside the turret. This spallation effect was often more dangerous than the initial entry hole itself. The internal atmosphere would immediately fill with smoke, the stench of burning insulation, and the screams of the wounded. The immediate reaction was to blindly reverse the tank out of the kill zone, often causing more chaos. If the projectile struck the engine compartment, a massive fire would erupt, quickly leading to a total loss of the tank. The crew was then forced to bail out under enemy fire, a desperate and deadly action in urban fighting. Personal accounts from captured German tankers vividly describe the rising paranoia in contested towns. One veteran described the fear of every black hole in the wall as a potential source of death. The PIAT was particularly feared because it bypassed the traditional strengths of the German armor. It rendered the thick frontal plate useless by focusing the attack on the vulnerable side or roof. The crews knew they had no effective countermeasure against a properly executed PIAT ambush. They relied solely on the quick thinking of the driver or the alertness of the accompanying infantry. The continuous, low-level stress of urban combat led to cases of combat fatigue and psychological breakdowns. The PIAT transformed the confident predator of the blitzkrieg into a hunted, cornered prey. Operating the PIAT demanded an exceptional level of personal bravery from the British infantryman. To use the weapon effectively, one had to deliberately close the distance with a fully armed enemy tank. The gunner often had to remain exposed until the tank was within point-blank range, ensuring a high probability hit. The difficulty in cocking the PIAT meant the operator was often physically exhausted before the engagement even began. Despite the inherent danger, PIAT gunners were responsible for some of the most valorous actions of the entire war. The British Empire recognized this extraordinary courage with numerous awards for heroism. Several Victoria Crosses, the highest military decoration, were earned by soldiers wielding the PIAT. Sergeant George Erdley was awarded the Victoria Cross for single-handedly destroying 3 German strongpoints, including 2 tanks. He pressed his attack despite being severely wounded, demonstrating immense determination and self-sacrifice. Rifleman Ganju Lama, a Gurkha soldier, received the Victoria Cross for knocking out 3 Japanese tanks in Burma. Lama's action showcased the PIAT's effectiveness in theaters of war far removed from the European urban centers. Major Robert Henry Kane's legendary stand at Arnhem involved destroying a total of 6 German tanks. He used the PIAT extensively during the brutal fighting, showcasing unparalleled aggression against armored vehicles. These examples highlight that the PIAT was only as effective as the man operating it. The soldiers who volunteered for or were assigned to PIAT teams were implicitly accepting a far greater risk. Their actions were a clear rejection of the idea that infantry were helpless against modern armor. These heroes personified the shift from defensive anti-tank tactics to aggressive, infantry-led assaults. They proved that a small, dedicated team could change the course of an entire engagement. The PIAT became a symbol of the ordinary infantryman's defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. The true test of the PIAT was its ability to defeat the most heavily armored tanks fielded by the SS divisions. The German Panther tank, with its thick, steeply sloped frontal armor, was a major challenge for all Allied guns. The dreaded Tiger I and its successor, the Tiger II, possessed armor so thick it bordered on the impenetrable. The PIAT's shaped charge could not reliably punch through the Panther's 80mm glacis plate at the front. It was against the side and rear armor of these titans that the PIAT proved its deadly worth. The side armor of a Panther was only 40 to 45 mm thick, a thickness easily defeated by a well-aimed PIAT round. A successful side hit almost always resulted in a mobility kill or an explosion of the stored ammunition. Against the massive Tiger I, the PIAT was still a potent threat in close-quarters urban fighting. Its side armor was 60 mm thick, which was within the practical penetration limits of the PIAT warhead. The tactical necessity was always to lure or force the tank into a position where its flanks were exposed. The PIAT teams were taught to aim for the tracks and suspension first to immobilize the behemoth. A stationary tank was a dead tank, as it could then be finished off by secondary PIAT or artillery fire. The most vulnerable point on all German tanks was the rear engine deck, covered by relatively thin armor. The infantry's ability to approach from the rear, often under cover of night or smoke, was critical. The PIAT forced the German armor to employ highly conservative, methodical movements. This slowing of the enemy's advance was, in itself, a significant operational victory for the Allies. The weapon's effectiveness demonstrated that even a technologically advanced tank had a fundamental weakness. The PIAT proved that the combined efforts of a brave soldier and a simple design could defeat engineering might. The operational lessons learned from the deployment of the PIAT fundamentally shaped post-war anti-tank weapon design. The concept of the shoulder-fired, infantry-portable anti-tank weapon was irrevocably cemented in military doctrine. The PIAT's success proved that mass-produced, relatively inexpensive anti-tank capability was a force multiplier. Its zero backblast feature directly influenced the design of subsequent Western recoilless rifles and rocket launchers. The understanding of the PIAT's effective use in urban combat became a standard part of infantry training. Military analysts observed that city fighting neutralized the advantage of tank firepower and thick armor. The psychological impact on the German tank crews was studied extensively by Allied intelligence after the war. The need to protect tanks from all-around threats led to the development of better auxiliary armor and fire control systems. The PIAT and the German Panzerfaust were the forefathers of the modern rocket-propelled grenade, or RPG. The ubiquitous RPG-7 of the Cold War and modern conflicts owes a direct debt to the PIAT's combat lineage. The principle of the shaped charge delivered by a small, man-portable device remains the cornerstone of infantry anti-tank power. The weapon's reliability issues, particularly the difficult cocking mechanism, served as important design warnings. Future designs prioritized ease of use and reduced physical strain on the operator. The legacy of the PIAT is one of overcoming technological disadvantage through practical innovation and courage. It demonstrated that a wartime necessity, even if imperfect, could become a highly effective combat tool. The PIAT's influence is seen in virtually every contemporary ground forces anti-tank equipment roster. It was a crucial step in the evolution of warfare, ensuring the infantry could always fight back against the tank. The weapon guaranteed that the tank would never again rule the battlefield with complete impunity. The PIAT's journey from a ridiculed piece of equipment to a legend of the battlefield is a compelling narrative. It is a story of British tenacity and the ultimate failure of technological arrogance. The initial German SS mockery was a reflection of their misplaced confidence in superior engineering. They failed to appreciate how tactical ingenuity could overcome mere technical specifications. The shift in attitude was complete when PIAT attacks began to cripple the finest German armor. Tank crews learned the hard way that an enemy with nothing to lose is the most dangerous kind. The shadow of the PIAT haunted the German advance through every European town and city. Every dark opening became a potential source of a shaped charge, a terrifying and unseen foe. The weapon achieved a remarkable kill-to-man-hour ratio, considering its simple design and operational difficulties. Its contribution to slowing and eventually halting the German armored counterattacks was undeniable. The PIAT became a symbol of the Allied infantry's stubborn resistance and fighting spirit. It was a primitive weapon that forced an entire enemy division to alter its core doctrine. The final irony is that the weapon they mocked became a major contributor to their eventual defeat. The PIAT proved that the infantryman, given the right tool and enough courage, could win the duel with the tank. Its legacy is not of technical brilliance but of battlefield efficacy and psychological impact. The dread it instilled in the SS Panzer crews is the ultimate measure of its success. The memory of the PIAT lives on in the history of anti-tank warfare as a crucial stepping stone. It forever changed the conversation about what was possible for the common foot soldier.